Welcome to this explainer. Today, I'm basically going to act as your personal exam coach to help you solve a really critical mystery in financial statement analysis. How exactly do creditors and investors evaluate a company's long-term survival? We're talking about solvency. If you're prepping for a major exam, or honestly, if you just want a rock-solid understanding of corporate finance, mastering these metrics is absolutely essential. So here's our game plan for today. 1. Solvency and capital structure. 2. The debt ratio. 3. Debt-to-equity ratio. 4. Times interest earned. And 5. Avoiding exam errors. Let's jump right in. All right, Section 1, Solvency and Capital Structure. Let's kick things off by nailing down exactly what we're actually trying to measure here. At its core, solvency fundamentally answers the question of whether an entity can survive in the long run. While liquidity ratios might tell us if a company can pay its bills next month, solvency really looks at the big picture. Can this business meet its long-term obligations? This survival capability is heavily dictated by two key things: the company's capital structure and its degree of leverage. Think of a company's finances kind of like a giant seesaw. On one side, you've got your resources, your assets, and on the other side, you have your financing, basically how you paid for those assets. That financing is carefully balanced between debt, which is what you owe, and equity, which is what you own. Leverage is simply using that debt to fund your operations, hoping to increase your potential return. But remember, this definitely comes at a cost. Debt carries fixed financial risks, meaning those interest payments, they have to be made regardless of whether sales are booming or totally tanking.
Moving on to Section 2, the debt ratio.
What's super interesting about this first metric is that it looks at the whole pie of a company's assets to figure out exactly how much of it actually belongs to the bank. The formula is incredibly straightforward. It's just total liabilities divided by total assets. This tells us the exact percentage of the company's assets that are funded through debt. It's a very direct measure of how much they're relying on outside creditors. Let's look at a quick mini scenario to really lock this in. Say Company A has a debt ratio of 0.8. Well, that means 80% of its assets are funded right through liabilities. That indicates a highly leveraged, pretty risky reliance on debt financing. But on the flip side, Company B has a ratio of 0.3. This tells us only 30% of their assets are debt funded, which points to a much less leveraged, far more conservative approach. So as an analyst or a candidate, when you see a high debt ratio, you instantly know that company carries a much heavier burden of fixed financial costs.
Okay, Section 3, debt-to-equity ratio.
Building on what we just talked about, let's actually compare our two financing sources head-to-head. Instead of looking at total assets, the debt-to-equity ratio pits what is owed directly against what is owned. The formula here is total liabilities divided by total stockholders' equity. This really examines that delicate balance between creditor financing and owner financing. When you're tracking this metric over time, the absolute magic number to watch is that 1.0 threshold. If a company's debt-to-equity ratio is exactly 1, they're using an equal amount of debt and equity. But anything greater than 1 implies the company's relying more on borrowed funds than on shareholder equity. Take Amy's Market, for instance. They hit a ratio of 1.0037 in year 5 before managing to drop it to 0.91 in year 6. A rising debt-to-equity ratio is a huge red flag. It signals an increasing reliance on creditors, which naturally pumps up your financial risk. Next up, Section 4. Times interest earned. So here's the thing. The balance sheet gives us the structure, right? But we really need the income statement to show us the day-to-day, ongoing survival capability. That brings us to our third metric. The times interest earned ratio, which you'll often hear called the interest coverage ratio, is calculated as EBIT, that's earnings before interest and taxes, divided by interest expense. This simply reflects the number of times a company's operating earnings can cover its interest obligations. When you're evaluating this one, a higher number is almost always stronger, simply because it means the company has a nice large safety cushion. Let's look at an example. Say Amy's Market boasts a comfortable 3.4 times coverage ratio. What does that actually mean? Well, it means they're generating operating earnings that are 3.4 times higher than their required interest payments. They have a massive buffer built in. Their earnings could shrink pretty significantly before they'd ever actually struggle to pay their creditors. But let's flip the script for a second. What if EBIT barely covers interest? Imagine a heavily leveraged company sitting at just a 1.1x ratio. Their earnings are just barely covering their interest payments. Guys, this is incredibly dangerous. Even a minor dip in sales, one unexpected cost, or a slight economic downturn could completely wipe out that tiny 0.1 buffer. And that means they'd instantly start defaulting on their long-term debt obligations. That is exactly why examiners and real-world investors scrutinize this number so intensely. Finally, Section 5, avoiding common exam errors. Listen, test writers absolutely love to prey on simple mistakes here. As a candidate, you're going to be expected to calculate and interpret these perfectly well under pressure. So let's prep for those trick questions right now and see how to separate the masters from the novices. First off, do not confuse the debt ratio with debt to equity. You've got to keep those denominators straight. The debt ratio uses total assets on the bottom, while debt to equity uses total equity. Mixing those two up is literally the most common error. Second, when you're calculating times interest earned, you absolutely must use the correct numerator, earnings before interest and taxes. Using bottom line net income is a fatal flaw. Why? Because interest and taxes have already been subtracted out of net income, which completely ruins the metric. And finally, never ever interpret high leverage as a purely good thing. Sure, leverage can increase the potential return on equity, but you always have to weigh it against the increased risk of carrying those heavy fixed financial costs. So as you wrap up your prep, keep this one core thought front and center. Leverage increases potential return, but at what cost to risk? It's a classic double-edged sword. It amplifies your returns, sure, but are you willing to accept the fatal risk of a market downturn? Really mastering the financial story behind these numbers means understanding that delicate balance. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Now go out there and absolutely crush that exam.